The crystal chandelier in my dining room had never looked more beautiful than it did that Tuesday evening, casting warm golden light across the mahogany table I'd spent 3 hours polishing to perfection. Every piece of my grandmother's china was arranged just so, each fork aligned with military precision, and the centerpiece of white peonies, Madison's favorite flowers, sat like a crown jewel in the middle of it all. I stepped back to admire my work, smoothing down my navy dress one more time, the same dress I'd worn to her wedding 4 years ago, when she'd whispered in my ear that she was so lucky to have me as a mother-in-law. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My heart hammered against my ribs as I checked the wall clock for the 100th time. 6:45. Madison and my son Ryan would walk through that front door any minute now, fresh from their anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, the fancy French restaurant downtown that cost more than most people's rent. I'd been planning this surprise celebration for weeks, ever since Ryan casually mentioned they'd be stopping by after their dinner to pick up some old photo albums Madison wanted to show her sister. The smell of beef Wellington, Madison's absolute favorite, wafted from the kitchen where I'd spent the better part of the afternoon perfecting the pastry, making sure the beef was exactly medium rare the way she liked it. Alongside it, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta, garlic mashed potatoes with real butter and cream, and a chocolate soufflé that I'd timed to be ready exactly when they'd finished the main course. Everything had to be perfect. Everything always had to be perfect when it came to Madison. I heard the familiar jingle of keys at the front door, followed by Madison's distinctive laugh, that bright musical sound that could fill a room and make everyone turn their heads. My hands fluttered to my pearl necklace, a nervous habit I'd developed over the years, and I positioned myself in the foyer with what I hoped was a welcoming smile. The door swung open, and there they were. Ryan looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly mussed from the October wind, but it was Madison who took my breath away, as she always did. Even after 4 years of marriage to my son, I still felt that little flutter of intimidation whenever she walked into a room. Tonight, she wore a stunning black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon, diamond earrings catching the light as she moved. "Maxie!" Madison called out, using the nickname she'd given me during their engagement, though somehow it never sounded quite as warm as it used to. "You didn't have to wait up for us. We're just grabbing those albums and heading home." "Actually," I said, my voice coming out slightly higher than I'd intended, "I thought since it's your anniversary and you were stopping by anyway, maybe we could celebrate a little. I made your favorite dinner." Ryan's face lit up immediately. "Mom, that's so sweet of you. Madison, didn't I tell you she makes the best beef Wellington in the city?" But Madison's expression remained neutral, polite but distant. "Oh, Maxie, that's really thoughtful, but we're absolutely stuffed from dinner. Plus, I have an early morning meeting with a client tomorrow. You know how it is with real estate. The market never sleeps." I felt my chest tighten, but I pressed on. "Of course, I understand completely. But maybe just a small slice? I timed the soufflé perfectly, and you know those can't wait." I gestured toward the dining room, hoping the elegant table setting might change her mind. Madison glanced at the dining room, taking in the china, the flowers, the flickering candles, and for just a moment, something unreadable flashed across her face. Then she turned back to me with that practiced smile she used with difficult clients. "Maxie, you really shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. We didn't ask you to cook for us." Tone was gentle, but there was an edge underneath that made my stomach drop. "Ryan, honey, could you grab those albums from the study? I really do need to get home." Ryan looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but not quite understanding its source. "Maybe we could just stay for a few minutes?" Mom obviously put a lot of work into this. "Your mother put work into something we never asked for," Madison said, her voice still maintaining that carefully controlled sweetness. "I mean, it's lovely, really. But we can't just drop everything because someone decides to cook dinner without checking if we're free." The word "someone" hit me like a physical blow. Not your mother or even Maxie. Someone. As if I were just some acquaintance who'd overstepped boundaries instead of the woman who'd raised the man she married, who'd helped plan their wedding, who'd been there for every milestone in their relationship. I just thought. I started, then stopped. What had I thought? That they'd be touched by the gesture? That Madison would throw her arms around me and say what a wonderful mother-in-law I was? That we'd sit around my table like a real family, laughing and sharing stories? You thought what? Madison's voice had lost even the pretense of gentleness now. That we'd just forget our own plans because you decided to play house? Maxie, I'm going to be honest with you because I think someone needs to be. This whole thing. She gestured around the foyer, taking in the flowers, the dim lighting, the carefully set table visible through the doorway. It's a little pathetic. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire, acrid and choking. Pathetic. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, and something deeper, something that felt like shame creeping up from my toes. Ryan's mouth fell open. Madison, what the hell? No, Ryan, let me finish. Madison held up a perfectly manicured hand. Your mother has this obsession with inserting herself into our lives. The surprise dinners, the unsolicited advice about everything from how I should arrange my furniture to what I should wear to your company parties. The constant hovering, the way she shows up unannounced with groceries because she thought we might be running low. It's suffocating. Each word felt like a slap. I thought back to all those times I'd stop by their apartment in Tribeca with fresh flowers from my garden, or the organic groceries I'd picked up when I noticed their refrigerator was nearly empty during my last visit. I'd thought I was being helpful, caring. I'd thought I was being a good mother-in-law. I was just trying to, I began, but Madison cut me off. You were trying to, what? Be needed? Be relevant? Her voice was rising now, the careful control slipping away to reveal something harder underneath. Maxie, you need to understand something. Ryan and I are adults. We have our own lives, our own routines, our own way of doing things. We don't need you to take care of us like we're children. Madison, stop. Ryan's voice was sharp now, angry. That's my mother you're talking to. And that's exactly the problem. Madison whirled to face him, her eyes flashing. You still see her as mom, who can do no wrong, but I see a lonely woman who can't accept that her son grew up and moved on. Do you know she called me 3 times this week? 3 times. Once to ask if we needed her to pick up our dry cleaning, once to suggest a new recipe she thought I should try, and once to offer to come over and help me organize our closets. I remembered those calls. I'd thought they were friendly, caring gestures. I'd thought Madison appreciated having someone who cared about the little details of her life. She means well, Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm sure she does, Madison replied, turning back to me with that brittle smile. But meaning well doesn't make it less pathetic. Maxie, you need to get a life. Your own life. Stop trying to live vicariously through ours. The dining room chandelier continued to cast its warm glow, the beef Wellington was probably at perfect temperature, and the chocolate soufflé was...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Likely rising beautifully in the oven. But all I could hear was that word echoing in my head. Pathetic. 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 I stood there in my navy dress, the one I'd chosen because Madison had once complimented it, feeling every one of my 62 years settling into my bones like lead weights. When had I become this person? When had my attempts at love and connection become something embarrassing, something to be pitied? You're right, I said quietly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I apologize for overstepping. The albums are in the study, second bookshelf from the left. Ryan looked stricken. Mom, we don't have to leave right now. Yes, you do, I said, still in that same calm voice that didn't sound like mine. Madison's right. You have your own lives. I shouldn't have assumed you'd want to spend your anniversary with me. Madison's expression softened slightly, perhaps hearing something in my tone that made her realize she'd gone too far. Maxie, I didn't mean to be so harsh. It's just... boundaries, you know. Healthy boundaries. Of course, I said. Healthy boundaries. Ryan disappeared into the study and returned a moment later with the photo albums tucked under his arm. He looked like he wanted to say something, to bridge the gap that had suddenly opened up in my foyer, but Madison was already reaching for the door handle. "Thank you for understanding," she said, and for the first time all evening she sounded genuinely sincere. "And I'm sorry about dinner. Maybe next time you could call first, just to check?" "Of course," I repeated. "Next time." After they left, I stood in my foyer for a long time, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the corner, breathing in the lingering scent of Madison's expensive perfume, mixed with the aroma of the meal I'd spent all day preparing. The house felt enormous around me, every room echoing with emptiness. I walked into the dining room and began clearing the table, carefully wrapping each piece of china in tissue paper before placing it back in the cabinet, where it would wait for the next special occasion that might never come. The peonies went into the trash. No point in keeping them when there was no one to appreciate them. The candles I blew out one by one, watching the smoke curl up toward the ceiling. In the kitchen, I turned off the oven and pulled out the chocolate soufflé. It had risen perfectly, golden and proud, completely unaware that no one would ever taste it. I scraped it into the garbage disposal, along with the beef Wellington, the Brussels sprouts, the garlic mashed potatoes. All of it. Every carefully prepared bite. As I stood at my kitchen sink, washing the dishes I dirtied in my attempt to create a perfect evening, Madison's words played on repeat in my head. Pathetic. Lonely. Needing to get a life. The worst part wasn't that she'd said it. It was that some part of me wondered if she was right. When had I become this person, who measured her worth by how useful she could be to others? When had my world shrunk down to the size of my son's life, his wife's preferences, their schedules and needs and wants? I thought back to the woman I'd been before Ryan was born, before his father died, before I dedicated every waking moment to being the perfect mother and then, by extension, the perfect mother-in-law. I'd had dreams once. A master's degree in art history that I'd never finished when I got pregnant with Ryan. A small business plan for an antique restoration company that I'd put aside when my husband got sick. Travel plans that I'd postponed indefinitely when Ryan needed me to help with college applications, then with finding an apartment, then with navigating his early career, then with wedding planning. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was supposed to have a life separate from his. I'd become so focused on being needed that I'd never stopped to ask myself what I actually needed. The phone rang as I was putting away the last of the dishes. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Ryan calling to apologize, to say they'd changed their minds and wanted to come back for dessert. But the caller ID showed my sister Janet's number. "Hey, Maxie." Janet's warm voice filled my ear. "How did the anniversary dinner go? Did Madison love the beef Wellington?" I opened my mouth to give her the cheerful update I'd been mentally preparing all week, but instead, something else came out. She called me pathetic. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "What happened?" I told her everything. The careful preparation, the perfect table setting, Madison's reaction, the word that had cut through me like a knife. As I spoke, I could hear my own voice becoming smaller, more uncertain, as if I were shrinking in real time. "Oh, honey," Janet said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. That was cruel of her to say. But what if she's right?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. What if I am pathetic? What if I have been inserting myself into their lives? What if I really don't have a life of my own? Maxie Cooper. Janet's voice was firm now, with an edge I recognized from our childhood when she'd defended me against playground bullies. "You are not pathetic. You're loving. There's a difference." "Is there? Because right now it doesn't feel like it." "Listen to me," Janet said. "Do you remember when we were kids, and you used to paint those beautiful watercolors? You were so talented, Maxie. You could capture light like nobody I'd ever seen. What happened to that part of you?" I closed my eyes, remembering the art studio I'd set up in the spare bedroom when Ryan was little. The way the afternoon light would stream through the windows and dance across my canvases. I'd had to convert it into Ryan's homework space when he started middle school, and somehow I'd never converted it back. "Life happened," I said quietly. "No." Janet's voice was gentle but insistent. "Martyrdom happened. You decided that being a good mother meant erasing yourself. And then you decided that being a good mother-in-law meant the same thing. But that's not love, Maxie. That's self-abandonment. After we hung up, I walked through my house seeing it with new eyes. It was beautiful. I'd always had good taste. But it was also like a museum, perfectly preserved and utterly lifeless. The walls were covered with family photos. Ryan's school pictures, his graduation, his wedding day. But where were the pictures of me? Where was the evidence that Maxine Cooper existed, as anything other than someone's mother, someone's mother-in-law? I climbed the stairs to the spare bedroom, the one that had once been my art studio. It was my guest room now, decorated in neutral tones and carefully arranged to be welcoming to visitors who rarely came. But in the closet, pushed far back behind the extra linens and holiday decorations, I found them. My easel, folded and dusty. Boxes of paints, brushes, canvases, the remnants of the person I used to be. As I pulled out the easel and set it up by the window, I thought about Madison's words again. Pathetic. Maybe she was right, but not in the way she thought. Maybe what was pathetic wasn't my desire to be close to them, but my willingness to make myself smaller and smaller, until I'd nearly disappeared entirely. I opened a tube of ultramarine blue and squeezed a small amount onto my palette. The color was as vibrant as I remembered, rich and deep and alive. I picked up a brush, and for the first time in years, I began to paint. Not for anyone else, not to please or impress or serve. Just for me. The painting that emerged wasn't particularly good. My hand was out of practice, my eye unused to seeing color and light the way it once had. But it was mine. It was evidence that Maxine Cooper still existed, somewhere underneath all the layers of motherhood and service and self-sacrifice I had wrapped around myself like bandages. As the sun began to rise outside my window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that I suddenly wanted to capture on canvas, I made a decision. Madison was right about one thing. I did need to get a life, my own life. But I was about to show her just how spectacular that life could be, and just how wrong she'd been about who I really was. What Madison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just some lonely widow living off my late husband's modest pension. I wasn't just some pathetic woman desperately trying to insert herself into other people's lives, because she had nothing of her own. 3 years ago, my late husband's pharmaceutical company had been acquired by a major corporation. The stock options he'd left me, which I'd held onto out of sentiment rather than any real understanding of their value, had suddenly become worth more money than I'd ever imagined possible. Not just comfortable money, not just enough to get by money, life-changing money, pathetic amounts of money, as Madison would say, though not in the way she thought. But I'd kept quiet about it, living simply, using the interest to help Ryan and Madison with their student loans, without telling them where the money really came from. I'd told them it was from my savings, and they'd never questioned it. They'd never wondered how a widow living alone could afford to pay off $50,000 in debt without batting an eye. I'd been so focused on being useful, on being needed, that I'd forgotten I had other options. I'd forgotten that I could be powerful. As I cleaned my brushes in the morning light, I smiled for the first time since Madison had walked out of my house. She thought I was pathetic. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. And maybe, in the process, I'd remember who I really was underneath all the years of making myself small. The old Maxine Cooper was gone, the one who measured her worth by how much others needed her, who apologized for taking up space, who accepted crumbs of affection and called them love. The woman who was emerging in her place was someone altogether different, someone who'd been sleeping for far too long. It was time to wake up. The first thing I did Monday morning was call my financial advisor, Robert Chen. We'd been working together for 3 years now, ever since the windfall from Gerald's stock options had landed in my lap like a lightning bolt from heaven. Robert was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my assets, and unlike my family, he treated me with the respect that 8 figures in investment portfolios tend to command. "Mrs. Cooper," his voice was warm and professional when he picked up, "what can I do for you today?" "Robert, I want to make some changes. Big ones." I was sitting in my kitchen, watching the morning light stream through the windows, feeling more awake than I had in years. I've been thinking about that conversation we had last year, about diversifying into real estate investments. Ah yes, the Manhattan properties. Are you ready to move forward with that? More than ready. But I want to be strategic about it. I want to focus on high-end residential properties in Manhattan, specifically luxury condominiums and co-ops. I paused, thinking about Madison's sleek apartment in Tribeca with its floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops. The kind of places young professionals with more ambition than capital tend to rent. Robert was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him typing. That's quite a shift from your current conservative portfolio approach. Are you comfortable with the risk level? Robert, I'm 62 years old with more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and no one to leave it to except a son who thinks I'm a pathetic housewife. I think it's time I started taking some risks. Understood. I'll put together a comprehensive overview of available properties in that market segment. What's your budget range? What would 10 million buy me? Another pause. In the current market? Quite a lot, actually. I'll have proposals to you by Wednesday. After I hung up, I made my second call of the day, this one to Elena Vasquez, a woman I'd met at a charity auction 6 months ago. Elena ran an exclusive event planning company that catered to Manhattan's elite, and she'd been after me for months to let her plan a proper housewarming party for the penthouse apartment I'd been secretly considering purchasing. Maxine! Darling, please tell me, you're finally ready to let me throw you the party you deserve. Actually, Elena, I have something else in mind. Something bigger. I found myself pacing around my kitchen, energy coursing through me like electricity. I want to throw a charity gala. Something spectacular. And I want to do it soon. Define soon. 3 weeks. Elena laughed, but it wasn't dismissive. It was delighted. You know I love a challenge. What's the cause? I thought for a moment. Arts education. Specifically, funding art programs in underserved schools. It felt right somehow. A way to honor the part of myself I'd abandoned for so long. Beautiful. What's your budget? Whatever it takes to make it the event of the season. Maxine Cooper, I think you and I are going to be very good friends. My third call was to Sophia Laurent, the personal stylist my late husband's business partner's wife had raved about at his funeral 3 years ago. I'd kept her card all this time, tucked away in my jewelry box like a secret promise to myself. Sophia Laurent Styling, this is Sophia. Hello, Sophia. My name is Maxine Cooper. I was referred to you by Patricia Brennan. I understand you help women reinvent themselves. That's one way to put it. What did you have in mind? Everything. Hair, wardrobe, the works. I want to become the woman I was meant to be before I forgot who that was. I love a transformation story. When can you come in? This afternoon? Sophia laughed. A rich, confident sound. A woman who knows what she wants. I like that. Come in at 2. Bring pictures of yourself from when you felt most beautiful, and leave everything else to me. The image I brought to Sophia's Madison Avenue boutique was a photograph from my honeymoon in Tuscany, 28 years ago. In it, I was wearing a flowing white sundress, my dark hair loose around my shoulders, laughing at something Gerald had said as we stood on a hillside, overlooking vineyards that stretched to the horizon. I looked radiant, confident, alive. This is gorgeous, Sophia said, studying the photo with the intensity of an art curator examining a masterpiece. Look at your posture, the way you're holding your head. You owned your space. When did you stop feeling like this? The question hit me like a physical blow. I don't know. Somewhere along the way, I guess. Life happened. Responsibilities. Well, we're going to get her back. Sophia's eyes were bright with purpose. But we're not going to recreate who you were. We're going to create who you're becoming. The next 4 hours passed in a whirlwind of hair color consultations, wardrobe fittings, and makeup lessons. Sophia worked with the precision of a surgeon and the vision of an artist, transforming me bit by bit into someone I barely recognized but somehow felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to become. My hair, which had been a sensible shoulder-length bob in an unremarkable shade of brown, became a sophisticated asymmetrical cut in rich chestnut with subtle golden highlights that caught the light when I moved. The new style framed my face in a way that emphasized my cheekbones and made my hazel eyes look mysterious rather than tired. The clothes Sophia selected were a revelation. Gone were the safe, modest dresses and cardigans I'd been hiding behind for years. In their place, she chose pieces that were elegant but powerful. A cream-colored silk blouse that skimmed my body without concealing it, tailored black trousers that made my legs look longer, a burgundy blazer that gave me shoulders I didn't know I had. "Color is your friend," Sophia explained as she added a bold red lipstick to my makeup bag. "You've been dressing like you want to disappear, but look at this skin, these eyes. You were meant to be seen." When she finally turned me around to face the full-length mirror, I gasped. The woman looking back at me was someone I remembered from dreams, from old photographs, from a time before I had learned to make myself small. She was confident, elegant, powerful. She was me, but more than I'd been in decades. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked. "Like I've been wearing a disguise my whole life, and you just helped me take it off." Perfect. That's exactly what we were going for. That evening, I stood in my bedroom trying on the clothes Sophia had selected, marveling at how different I felt in each outfit. The woman in the mirror moved differently, held herself differently. She looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms and art galleries. Someone who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. I was admiring the way a midnight blue dress hugged my curves when my phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom, I wanted to call and apologize for the other night. Madison feels terrible about what she said." "We both do." I walked to my window, looking out at the garden I'd spent years perfecting, and felt a strange detachment from the woman who had cared so much about having the perfect peonies for a dinner party that was never meant to happen. "There's nothing to apologize for, Ryan." Madison was being honest. I appreciate honesty. She wasn't being honest, she was being cruel. And I should have defended you better. Should you have? Or should you have listened to what she was actually saying? I turned away from the window, catching sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman there looked nothing like the one who had stood in this same spot 3 days ago. Maybe it's time I stopped needing to be defended and started defending myself. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Madison was right about some things. I have been inserting myself into your lives. I have been trying to be needed instead of just being myself. And maybe it is time I got a life of my own." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." "I feel different. In fact, I have some news. I'm throwing a charity gala in 3 weeks. For arts education. I'd like you and Madison to come." "A charity gala? Mom, that sounds expensive. Are you sure you can afford?" "Don't worry about the money, sweetheart. I have it handled." "But Mom, Dad's pension isn't that much, and I know you've been helping us with our loans. You shouldn't be spending money on parties when—" "Ryan," I interrupted, my voice carrying a firmness that surprised us both. "I said I have it handled. The invitations will go out next week. I hope you'll be there." After I hung up, I realized that I'd just spoken to my son without apologizing once, without asking if he needed anything, without offering to do something for him. It felt strange, this new way of being in relationship to the people I loved. Strange, but also liberating. The next morning brought a call from Robert with news that made my heart race with excitement. 3 properties had come on the market overnight, all in prime Manhattan locations, all within my budget. One in particular caught my attention. A stunning penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, with panoramic views of Central Park, available for immediate purchase from a tech executive who was relocating to San Francisco. It's 1,800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and it's been completely renovated with the highest-end finishes, Robert explained. The asking price is $7.5 million. "I'll take it. Don't you want to see it first?" "Robert, life is short, and I've spent too much of it being careful. Schedule the viewing for this afternoon, but start the paperwork now. I want to move quickly." The apartment was everything Robert had promised and more. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew I was home. The living room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the park, and the master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom with a soaking tub that overlooked the city skyline. The kitchen was a work of art, all marble countertops and custom cabinetry, and there was even a small study where I could set up a proper art studio. But what sealed the deal for me was the building itself. As I was touring the apartment, I learned from the real estate agent that several high-profile young professionals lived in the building, including, she mentioned, casually, a successful real estate agent named Madison Cooper, who had the penthouse in the building next door. The irony was too perfect to resist. I would be living in the same exclusive neighborhood as my daughter-in-law, the woman who had called me pathetic just 4 days ago. The woman who thought I was some sad, lonely widow with nothing better to do than insert myself into other people's lives. I signed the papers that afternoon. Elena called me the next day with updates on the gala planning, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Darling, I've secured the rainbow room for the date you wanted. Do you know how impossible that usually is on such short notice? But when I mentioned your name and the budget we're working with, they suddenly had a cancellation. Money does open doors, doesn't it? Like you wouldn't believe. I've also put together a preliminary guest list based on the charity contacts I've developed over the years. We're talking about CEOs, art collectors, museum directors, society philanthropists, the kind of people who write checks with lots of zeros. Perfect. Make sure Ryan Cooper and Madison Cooper are on the list. Your family? In a manner of speaking." That afternoon, I met with the interior designer Elena had recommended, a brilliant woman named Chloe Kim, who specialized in creating spaces that were both luxurious and livable. We spent 3 hours walking through the penthouse, discussing color palettes and furniture styles, planning a transformation that would turn the already beautiful space into something truly spectacular. I wanted to feel like a sanctuary, I told her as we stood in the living room, watching the afternoon light play across the hardwood floors, but also like a place where important things happen, where serious conversations take place and significant decisions are made. I understand completely. We're going to create a space that reflects who you're becoming, not who you've been. Chloe's vision for the apartment was breathtaking. Rich jewel tones balanced with creamy neutrals, vintage pieces mixed with contemporary art, luxurious fabrics that invited touch while maintaining sophistication. She showed me sketches of a master bedroom that looked like something from a high-end hotel, a kitchen that would make professional chefs weep with envy, and a living room that could host intimate dinner parties or important business meetings with equal ease. "The study is where we'll really have some fun," she said, pulling out plans for the small room I'd designated as my art studio. "I'm thinking custom built-ins for your supplies, professional lighting, and a seating area where you can step back and really see your work. This is going to be the heart of the apartment." As I signed the design contract, I felt a thrill of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in decades, I was creating something just for me, something that reflected my taste, my vision, my desires. No one else's opinions mattered. No one else's approval was required. The invitations to the gala went out the following Monday, delivered by messenger to ensure they arrived with appropriate ceremony. Elena had outdone herself with the design. Heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, each one individually calligraphed. The invitation read, "Mrs. Maxine Cooper requests the honor of your presence at a benefit gala for arts education. The Rainbow Room Saturday evening. The 28th cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, black tie at the bottom, in smaller print. Proceeds to benefit arts programs in underserved schools throughout New York City." I hand-delivered Ryan and Madison's invitation myself, slipping it under their door with a small note. "Looking forward to seeing you there. Love, Mom." Ryan called me within an hour. "Mom, what is this? The Rainbow Room? This must be costing you a fortune." "It's costing exactly what it should cost to make a difference in children's lives. But where is this money coming from? I'm worried about you. Are you borrowing against the house? Because if you need help..." "Ryan, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not borrowing money. I am not in financial trouble. I am not making irresponsible decisions. I am finally making decisions that reflect who I actually am instead of who I thought I should be. But I don't understand. How can you afford this? All will be revealed in due time. For now, just trust that your mother knows what she's doing." Madison called me later that evening. Her voice, carefully modulated in the way I'd learned, meant she was trying to control her emotions. "Maxie, Ryan showed me the invitation. It's beautiful and the cause is wonderful. But I have to ask, are you sure this is wise? I mean, financially speaking?" There was something in her tone that made me pause. Not concern, exactly. Something more calculating. "I'm touched by your concern, Madison. It's just that, well, Ryan mentioned you've been helping us with our student loans, and we both feel terrible that you might be overspending on our account. If you're having trouble affording this gala because you've been supporting us—" "Madison," I interrupted, my voice warm but firm, "the gala has nothing to do with you and Ryan. This is about something I want to do with my own money. Of course, I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that $50,000 is a lot of money, and if paying off our loans has put you in a difficult position, $50,000. The amount I'd quietly transferred to their accounts over the past year to help them become debt-free. Madison had been keeping track. Of course she had. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but you don't need to worry about my financial situation. I'll see you at the gala." After I hung up, I sat in my old kitchen for a long time, thinking about that phone call. Madison wasn't concerned about my finances. She was concerned about her access to them. The gala had made her realize that maybe I had more resources than she'd assumed, and she was trying to figure out how that might affect her. It was an illuminating conversation, and it crystallized something I'd been thinking about since that disastrous anniversary dinner. Madison didn't see me as pathetic because I was lonely or intrusive. She saw me as pathetic because she thought I was weak, controllable, financially dependent on my son's goodwill. She'd been managing me the way she'd manage any other inconvenient but potentially useful resource. But resources, I was learning, were only useful if they remained under your control. And I was done being controlled. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Movers transferred my belongings to the penthouse while Chloe's team worked around them, transforming the space into something that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. The art studio came together beautifully, with north-facing windows that provided perfect natural light and custom storage for supplies I hadn't used in years. I started painting again in earnest, working on a series of cityscapes that captured the view from my new windows at different times of day. The paintings were loose, impressionistic, full of light and movement and life. They were nothing like the careful, realistic portraits I'd painted years ago. These were bolder, more confident, more honest. Sophia had been right about color being my friend. I found myself drawn to vibrant blues and greens, warm golds and deep purples. The paintings practically glowed with energy, and each one felt like a small rebellion against the muted, careful woman I'd been for so long. 3 days before the gala, Elena called with final details. The guest list had grown to over 200 people, including some of the most influential philanthropists and art collectors in the city. The menu had been finalized. Past hors d'oeuvre during cocktails, followed by a 3-course dinner, featuring ingredients from local farms and purveyors. The live auction would showcase experiences donated by some of New York's most exclusive venues, private museum tours, cooking classes with celebrity chefs, weekend getaways to the Hamptons. "The proceeds are going to be incredible," Elena said. "We're looking at raising over $500,000 for the arts programs." "That's wonderful. What about the surprise I asked you to arrange?" "All set. The photographer will be there from the beginning, and I've arranged for the slideshow to be displayed during dinner. Are you sure you want to do this?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The surprise Elena was referring to was something I'd been planning since the day I decided to throw the gala. Along with raising money for arts education, the evening would serve another purpose: the official launch of the Maxine Cooper Foundation for the Arts, a charitable organization I'd been quietly establishing with Robert's help over the past 2 weeks. The foundation would provide grants to young artists, fund arts programs in schools, and offer scholarships to students pursuing degrees in creative fields. The initial endowment I'd provided was substantial enough to ensure the foundation's work could continue for decades. But more than that, the foundation would serve as my public declaration of independence. No longer would I be known simply as Ryan Cooper's mother or Gerald Cooper's widow. I would be Maxine Cooper, philanthropist and arts advocate, a woman of substance and influence in her own right. The night before the gala, I stood in my new penthouse apartment, wearing one of the stunning dresses Sophia had selected for me, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. Tomorrow night, I would stand in front of 200 of New York's most influential people and reveal who I really was. Tomorrow night, Madison would see exactly how wrong she'd been about who I was and what I was capable of. But more importantly, tomorrow night, I would finally see myself clearly for the first time in years. Not as someone's mother or someone's mother-in-law, but as Maxine Cooper, a woman with her own dreams, her own power, her own magnificent life to live. The pathetic woman Madison had dismissed was gone forever. In her place stood someone she'd never seen coming, someone with the resources and the will to reshape not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. And this was just the beginning. The Rainbow Room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a stunning arrangement of white orchids and gold-dusted eucalyptus. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a backdrop so magnificent that several guests were already taking photographs before the cocktail hour had officially begun. I stood near the entrance in a midnight blue silk gown that Sophia had insisted was absolutely perfect for the occasion. The dress hugged my curves in all the right places, with intricate beadwork that caught the light as I moved. My hair was styled in an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings I'd inherited from my grandmother, and the makeup artist Sophia had sent over had created a look that was dramatic without being overdone. I felt beautiful, powerful, and completely in control. Elena appeared at my elbow, radiant in a champagne-colored dress that complemented her dark skin perfectly. "Maxine, you look absolutely stunning. Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for this my entire life. I just didn't know it until now." The first guests began arriving at exactly 7 o'clock, and I was amazed at how naturally I fell into the role of hostess. These weren't people who would be impressed by homemade beef Wellington or carefully arranged peonies. These were titans of industry, celebrated artists, museum curators, and society philanthropists who expected excellence as a matter of course. And somehow, I belonged among them. Margaret Pemberton, the director of the Whitney Museum, took my hand warmly as Elena introduced us. "Mrs. Cooper, I've been hearing wonderful things about your foundation. It's exactly the kind of initiative the arts community needs right now. Please, call me Maxine. And thank you. I've been passionate about arts education for years, but I'm only now in a position to do something meaningful about it. I'd love to discuss potential partnerships between your foundation and our educational outreach programs. Perhaps we could schedule lunch next week?" As Margaret moved on to greet other guests, I felt a surge of pride. This was what I'd been missing all these years, the opportunity to engage with intelligent, passionate people about subjects that mattered to me. These conversations energized me in a way that discussions about Ryan's work schedule or Madison's latest real estate deals never had. Charles Whitmore, a prominent art collector whose donations had funded entire wings of major museums, approached with his wife Vivian. "Maxine, Vivian and I were just discussing your initiative. We're particularly interested in the scholarship component of your foundation. Charles has been looking for the right organization to partner with on a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in pursuing art history degrees," Vivian added. "Your foundation sounds like it might be exactly what we've been searching for." We talked for nearly 15 minutes about the specifics of the scholarship program I'd been developing with Robert's help. By the end of our conversation, Charles had committed to matching whatever funds the gala raised, effectively doubling the foundation's impact for its inaugural year. "I'm impressed," Charles said as our conversation wound down. "Most people who enter philanthropy at your level start with safe, established charities. It takes vision and courage to create something entirely new. Sometimes the best time to start something new is when you finally understand what you're capable of," I replied. As the cocktail hour continued, I found myself in one fascinating conversation after another. Dr. Sarah Kim, who ran a nonprofit that brought art therapy programs to children's hospitals, wanted to collaborate on a pilot program. James Morrison, a Broadway producer, was interested in funding theater programs in public schools. Lisa Chen, who owned a chain of galleries in Soho, offered to host a fundraising exhibition featuring work by scholarship recipients. I was deep in conversation with Elena Rodriguez, a documentary filmmaker who is pitching a project about the impact of arts education on underserved communities, when I spotted familiar faces near the entrance. Ryan looked handsome in his black tuxedo, though he seemed slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the venue. Madison, however, looked absolutely stunning in a form-fitting red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. But what struck me most was the expression on Madison's face as she took in the scene. She'd clearly expected a modest charity dinner, perhaps in a hotel banquet room, with a few dozen guests, and a silent auction featuring donated gift certificates to local restaurants. Instead, she was looking at an event that rivaled the Met Gala in terms of elegance and exclusivity. I excused myself from Elena and made my way over to greet them, noting how conversations seemed to pause as I passed. People were curious about me, I realized. The mysterious philanthropist who'd appeared seemingly out of nowhere with enough resources and connections to pull together an event of this caliber on 3 weeks' notice. Ryan, Madison, I'm so glad you could make it, I said, kissing Ryan's cheek and offering Madison my hand. Mom, this is incredible, Ryan said, his eyes wide as he took in the opulent surroundings. I had no idea. How did you manage all this? With excellent help and adequate resources, I replied smoothly. Madison, you look lovely. Red is definitely your color. Madison's smile seemed frozen in place. Thank you, Maxie. This is quite an event. I'm curious, though. How exactly did you get connected with all these people? I recognize several names from the guest list, and they're not typically accessible to people outside their usual circles. The slight hesitation before her last words was telling. She'd been about to say something else, something less diplomatic. Something like, people like you, or people without connections. Madison was trying to figure out how someone she dismissed as pathetic had managed to gain access to Manhattan's philanthropic elite. Elena Vasquez has been invaluable, I said, gesturing toward Elena, who was now chatting with a group near the windows. She knows everyone worth knowing in this city, and once people understand the cause and see the level of commitment behind it, they tend to be quite supportive. Level of commitment, Madison repeated. That must require significant financial backing. Ryan looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Madison, maybe we should. No, it's a fair question, I interrupted. Philanthropy at this level does require substantial resources. Fortunately, I'm in a position to provide them. Before Madison could probe further, Elena appeared with a distinguished-looking man in tow. Maxine, I'd like you to meet David Sterling. He's the CEO of Sterling Industries and one of the city's most generous supporters of educational initiatives. As we spoke with David about potential corporate sponsorship opportunities, I noticed Madison hanging back slightly, her eyes constantly scanning the room. She was doing what she did best, assessing, calculating, trying to understand the financial dynamics of the situation. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to reconcile the woman who had called her pathetic with the woman who was casually discussing million-dollar charitable commitments with some of the city's most powerful people. Dinner was announced at 8:30, and guests began making their way to their assigned tables. I deliberately seated Ryan and Madison at a table with Charles and Vivian Whitmore, Margaret Pemberton, and Dr. Sarah Kim, people whose wealth and influence were well established and unquestionable. I wanted Madison to understand exactly what league I was playing in now. My own table was positioned at the front of the room, with Elena, Robert Chen, Sophia Laurent, and several other key collaborators in the Foundation's launch. As we took our seats, I could see Madison craning her neck to get a better view of our table, clearly trying to identify the people I was dining with. The first course was served as Elena stood to welcome the guests and introduce the evening's purpose. She spoke eloquently about the importance of arts education and the difference that programs like ours could make in children's lives. Then she turned the microphone over to me. As I stood and walked to the podium, the room fell silent. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the moment when I would stop being someone's mother, someone's mother-in-law, someone's widow, and start being simply myself. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight for what I hope will be the first of many gatherings dedicated to supporting arts education in our city's schools. My voice was steady, confident, carrying easily to the back of the room. Some of you may be wondering who I am and why I've decided to launch the Maxine Cooper Foundation for the Arts. It's a fair question, and the answer is both simple and complicated. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, noting the attentive faces turned toward me. Simple because the cause is one that should matter to anyone who believes in the power of creativity to transform lives. Complicated because my journey to this moment has been longer and more circuitous than I ever expected it would be. I clicked a small remote, and the screens positioned around the room lit up with the first slide of a presentation Elena had helped me prepare. It showed a photograph of me from college, standing in front of one of my paintings at a student exhibition. 40 years ago, I was an art history student at Columbia, with dreams of opening my own gallery someday. I was passionate about helping people discover the transformative power of art, about making creative expression accessible to everyone regardless of their background or economic circumstances. The next slide showed my wedding photo, Gerald and me laughing as we cut our cake. Then life happened, as it tends to do. I got married, had a child, and gradually my own dreams took a back seat to supporting my family's dreams. For nearly 4 decades, I convinced myself that this was enough, that finding fulfillment through other people's achievements was the same as finding it through my own. Madison's face was visible from where I stood, and I could see the confusion in her expression as she tried to process this version of me with the one she thought she knew. But recently I was reminded that a life lived entirely in service of others isn't really a life at all. It's a kind of extended martyrdom that benefits no one, least of all the people we think we're serving. I paused, letting that statement settle. So I decided to stop apologizing for taking up space and start using that space to make a difference. The next slide showed the Foundation's mission statement, accompanied by statistics about the decline in arts education funding in public schools. The Maxine Cooper Foundation for the Arts will provide grants directly to schools in underserved communities, fund after-school and summer art programs, and offer scholarships to students who want to pursue creative careers but lack the financial resources to do so. As I continued my presentation, outlining the Foundation's goals and the impact we hoped to achieve, I felt a strange sense of coming home to myself. This was who I was meant to be. Not someone hovering in the background of other people's lives, but someone standing confidently in the spotlight of her own. The foundation launches with an initial endowment of $5 million, I announced, and I heard several audible gasps from the audience. But our goal for tonight is to raise an additional $500,000 to fund our first year of programming. From my position at the podium, I could see Ryan's mouth fall open in shock. $5 million. Where had his recently widowed mother gotten $5 million to start a foundation? The same question was clearly running through Madison's mind, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, calculation, and something that looked almost like panic. The live auction that followed was a resounding success. The weekend in the Hamptons that Elena had secured sold for $15,000. A private cooking class with a James Beard Award winner went for $12,000. By the time the evening was over, we'd raised $620,000, exceeding our goal by more than 20%. But the real triumph wasn't the money, though that was certainly gratifying. The real triumph was the way people responded to me throughout the evening. I wasn't treated as someone's wife or mother or a wealthy widow looking for ways to spend her husband's money. I was treated as a serious philanthropist with a clear vision and the resources to make it happen. Business cards were exchanged, lunch meetings were scheduled, collaboration agreements were discussed. By the end of the night, the foundation had more potential partnerships than I could have imagined, and I had a social calendar that looked nothing like the empty weeks I'd been filling with cooking elaborate meals for ungrateful children. As the evening wound down and guests began making their way to the elevators, Ryan and Madison approached me near the coat check. Ryan still looked stunned, while Madison's expression was carefully neutral in that way I'd learned meant she was working hard to control her emotions. "Mom, that was amazing," Ryan said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, but I have to ask, $5 million? How is that possible?" Your father's stock options from the pharmaceutical company finally matured, I said simply. When the company was acquired 3 years ago, the shares he'd accumulated over 20 years of working there suddenly became quite valuable. But why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you had that kind of money. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt a complicated mix of affection and sadness. You never asked, sweetheart. You assumed I was struggling financially, and I let you assume it because it made you feel needed. But that wasn't fair to either of us. Madison stepped forward, her social smile firmly in place. Maxie, this is wonderful news. I mean, about your financial security. Ryan and I have been so worried about you managing on just Gerald's pension. Have you? I asked mildly. How thoughtful. We just want to make sure you're being smart about this. $5 million is a lot of money to give away all at once. Have you consulted with a financial advisor? Maybe we should set up a meeting to discuss how to manage this windfall responsibly. There it was. The real Madison. The one who saw dollar signs and started calculating how she might gain access to them. She wasn't concerned about my financial security. She was concerned about her potential inheritance being donated to charity instead of reserved for her and Ryan. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I have an excellent financial advisor, and this is just the beginning. The $5 million for the foundation is a small fraction of the total inheritance. Gerald was very good at accumulating assets, and very good at keeping quiet about it. Madison's face went pale. A small fraction? Robert estimates the total value at somewhere around $50 million. Give or take a few million, depending on market fluctuations. I delivered this information with the same casual tone I might use to discuss the weather. Of course, that's before taxes and before the additional charitable donations I'm planning to make over the next few years. Ryan sank into a nearby chair, looking like he might faint. $50 million? Mom, are you serious? Quite serious. Your father believed in living modestly and saving aggressively. Turns out he was very good at both. Madison's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Maxie, we need to talk about this. I mean, really talk. This kind of money requires serious estate planning, tax considerations, investment strategies. You can't just give it all away to charity. Can't I? It's my money, isn't it? Well, yes, but you have to think about Ryan's future, about your potential grandchildren. You have a responsibility to family. Do I? Because just 2 weeks ago, you told me I was pathetic and needed to get a life of my own. Now suddenly I have responsibilities to family? The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Madison's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed completely at a loss for words. I think, I continued, that the responsible thing is for me to use this money in ways that align with my values and bring me joy. The foundation does that. The scholarships and grants will do that. Living my own life, finally, will do that. But $50 million, Ryan said weakly. Mom, that's generational wealth. That's the kind of money that could set up trusts for grandchildren, fund college educations, provide security for decades. And it can still do all of those things for the right grandchildren. The ones who appreciate education and creativity and hard work. The ones who will benefit from the scholarship programs we're funding. I smiled at both of them, feeling lighter than I had in years. Who knows? Maybe someday one of those scholarship recipients will marry into our family and show us what real gratitude looks like. Madison's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might actually lose her temper in public. But she was too smart for that, too aware of where we were and who might be watching. I think we should continue this conversation later, she said tightly. When we can discuss things more privately. Of course. I'll have my assistant coordinate with both of you to set up a meeting. Though I should mention that any future discussions about my finances will include my attorney and financial advisor. I believe in transparency when it comes to family matters. As they left, I noticed Madison gripping Ryan's arm tightly, her knuckles white with tension. She was already planning her next move, I was sure. The woman who had called me pathetic was now realizing that she'd seriously underestimated her opponent. But I wasn't thinking of this as a battle, I was thinking of it as a liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was living according to my own priorities, spending my own money on things that mattered to me, building relationships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. Elena found me near the windows, looking out at the city lights that twinkled like stars below us. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I've been sleepwalking for 40 years and just woke up," I replied. "And like this is only the beginning. What's next?" I thought about the penthouse apartment waiting for me, about the art studio where I could paint again, about the foundation that would carry my name and my values into the world. I thought about the lunch meetings scheduled with museum directors and gallery owners, about the scholarship recipients whose lives we'd change, about the programs we'd fund and the creativity we'd unleash. "Everything," I said. "Absolutely everything." The next morning, I woke up in my new penthouse to the most beautiful sunrise I'd ever seen. Central Park stretched out below my windows like a green jewel, and the city beyond it hummed with possibility. I made coffee in my new kitchen, carried it to my art studio, and began work on a new painting, a self-portrait of the woman I'd become. As I mixed colors on my palette, my phone buzzed with text messages. The first was from Margaret Pemberton at the Whitney, confirming our lunch meeting and expressing excitement about potential collaborations. The second was from Charles Whitmore, with details about the scholarship matching program he wanted to establish. The third was from Elena, with a list of reporters who wanted to interview me about the foundation and last night's successful launch. The fourth message was from Madison. "We need to talk. This is important." I read her message twice, then deleted it without responding. Madison was right that we needed to talk, but it would be on my terms now, when I was ready, with my legal and financial team present. The days of me dropping everything to manage other people's emotions were over. Instead, I picked up my brush and began painting. The woman taking shape on the canvas was confident, elegant, powerful. She was someone who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim the space she deserved in the world. She was someone who would never again apologize for being exactly who she was meant to be. The transformation was complete, but the real story was just beginning. Madison had called me pathetic, but she'd had no idea about my pathetic amounts of money. More importantly, she'd had no idea about my pathetic amounts of strength, determination, and pure refusal to be diminished by anyone ever again. The old Maxine would have worried about family harmony, about making peace, about finding ways to smooth over the conflict. The new Maxine was more interested in using her resources and her freedom to build something meaningful, something lasting, something that would matter long after family dinners and hurt feelings were forgotten. I had work to do, a foundation to run, artists to support, and a life to live. My own life, finally and completely my own. The morning after the gala, I sat in my art studio with a cup of coffee and the New York Times Society page spread out before me. There, in full color, was a photograph of me at the podium, looking confident and radiant as I addressed the audience. The headline read, "Philanthropist Maxine Cooper launches foundation with record-breaking fundraiser." The article described the evening as an elegant affair that raised over $600,000 for arts education, and quoted several prominent attendees praising both the cause and my vision for the foundation. I was studying the photograph, marveling at how different I looked from the woman who had stood in her kitchen just 3 weeks ago feeling worthless and forgotten, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my attorney's office. "Mrs. Cooper, this is Janet Morrison from Harrison Walsh & Associates. Mr. Harriso asked me to call you about some urgent matters that have come up regarding your estate planning." "What kind of urgent matters?" "Well, it seems your daughter-in-law has been calling our office repeatedly since yesterday morning, insisting that she needs to discuss your recent financial decisions with Mr. Harrison immediately. She claims to be acting as a family representative and says there are concerns about your mental competency." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate calm. "My mental competency?" "She's suggesting that the large charitable donation you made might indicate that you're not thinking clearly about your financial future. She's requesting copies of your will and trust documents, and she's asked about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent to manage their own affairs." The audacity was breathtaking. Less than 24 hours after learning about my financial resources, Madison was already trying to find ways to control them. The woman who had called me pathetic was now attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could access my money. What did Mr. Harrison tell her? He told her that he cannot discuss your private affairs with anyone without your explicit written consent, and that questioning a client's mental competency would require substantial evidence of cognitive decline, which obviously doesn't exist in your case. He also suggested that if she has concerns about family financial planning, she should encourage you to schedule a meeting with all parties present. And her response? She insisted that you're being manipulated by people who want access to your money, and that the family has a responsibility to protect you from making poor decisions. Mr. Harrison ended the conversation at that point. After I hung up, I called Robert Chen immediately. If Madison was going to play games, I needed to make sure all my assets were properly protected. Robert, I need you to implement the trust structures we discussed last month. I want everything moved into irrevocable trusts immediately. Are you sure? Once those trusts are established, you'll have limited ability to modify them. I'm positive. I also want to establish a personal protection trust for myself, something that will ensure I maintain control over my living expenses and personal needs while making it impossible for anyone to claim I'm being financially irresponsible. Maxine, has something happened? You sound concerned. I told him about Madison's calls to my attorney and about her suggestions that I might not be competent to manage my own affairs. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I see. Well, the irrevocable trusts will certainly protect your assets from any kind of outside interference. And I can recommend a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations if you'd like to have your mental acuity formally documented. Do that. I want everything bulletproof. That afternoon, I had lunch with Margaret Pemberton at a charming French bistro near the Whitney Museum. We spent 2 hours discussing potential collaborations between the foundation and the museum's educational programs, and by the end of the meal, we'd outlined a partnership that would provide art classes and museum internships for scholarship recipients. I have to say, Maxine, your foundation couldn't have come at a better time, Margaret said as we finished our dessert. Arts funding has been cut so dramatically in recent years that many of our outreach programs were in danger of being discontinued. That's exactly why I wanted to focus on education, rather than just collecting art for my own enjoyment. What's the point of beautiful things if they're not accessible to everyone? As we were leaving the restaurant, Margaret paused on the sidewalk. Can I ask you something personal? Last night, you mentioned that you'd spent years supporting other people's dreams instead of your own. What changed? What made you decide to step into your own life so boldly? I thought about the question as we walked toward the museum. Someone I cared about told me I was pathetic and needed to get a life of my own. It was cruel, but it was also the wake-up call I needed. Sometimes the truth hurts so much that it forces you to change everything. Well, their loss is certainly the art world's gain. That evening, I was reviewing grant applications in my study when my doorman called to announce that Ryan was in the lobby asking to see me. I told him to send Ryan up, curious about what had prompted this unannounced visit. Ryan looked haggard when I opened the door, his usually neat appearance disheveled, and his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept. He stood in my foyer, taking in the elegant decor, the original artwork on the walls, the crystal chandelier that cast warm light over everything. Mom, we need to talk. Of course. Would you like some coffee? Wine? Coffee would be good. I led him to the kitchen, noting how he kept glancing around with an expression of bewilderment. The penthouse was beautiful, but it was also expensive in a way that made my previous lifestyle look almost quaint by comparison. How long have you been planning this? He asked as I poured coffee into 2 mugs. Planning what? The foundation? The apartment? My general transformation into someone you don't recognize? All of it. The money, the new look, the whole reinvention. How long have you been keeping this from me? I handed him his coffee and leaned against the marble countertop. I haven't been keeping anything from you, Ryan. I've been discovering things about myself. There's a difference. But the money. $50 million, Mom. How could you not tell me Dad left that much? Because you never asked. Because you assumed I was struggling and needed your help. And I let you assume it because it made you feel good about yourself. But also because I didn't fully understand the extent of it myself until recently. Ryan sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. Madison thinks you're having some kind of midlife crisis. She thinks someone is taking advantage of you. Madison thinks I should give her control over my finances. Madison is wrong. She's just worried about you, we both are. This is such a dramatic change from who you've always been. I sat across from him, studying his face. My son looked genuinely distressed, but I couldn't tell if it was concern for my well-being or concern about his inheritance. Perhaps it was both. Ryan, who have I always been? Really? Describe the mother you think you know. He looked confused by the question. You've always been. I don't know. Caring. Devoted. You put family first. You were always there when I needed you. And what about what I needed? What do you mean? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted? What I was interested in? What my dreams were? Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of all the conversations we'd never had. I guess I never thought about it, he admitted finally. You always seemed happy just being our mom. I convinced myself I was happy. There's a difference. I reached across the table and took his hand. Ryan, I love you more than anything in this world. But I can't love you at the expense of myself anymore. I won't. So what does that mean for us, for our relationship? It means we have the opportunity to build a new kind of relationship. One where I'm not just your mother who exists to serve your needs, but a whole person with my own interests and goals in life. One where you might actually get to know who I really am. Ryan squeezed my hand. I'd like that. I really would. But Madison is scared, Mom. She thinks you're going to give away all the money and leave us with nothing. And what do you think? He was quiet for a long moment. I think you've earned the right to do whatever you want with your money. But I also think $50 million is a lot to give away. I'm not giving it all away, Ryan. I'm investing it in things that matter to me. The foundation will outlive me and continue doing good work long after I'm gone. That seems like a better legacy than just leaving a pile of cash to people who never appreciated what they already had. People like Madison and me? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee and watching the city lights twinkle outside the kitchen windows. Finally, Ryan spoke again. She wants to contest Dad's will. Madison does. She thinks maybe there was a mistake, or that someone forged documents to make it look like Dad had more money than he actually did. I felt a chill run down my spine. On what grounds? She's been researching inheritance law. She thinks if she can prove that you're not mentally competent to manage such a large inheritance, she might be able to have a conservatorship established. With her as the conservator, I assume. She thinks it would be better for everyone if the money was managed by people who understand finance and investment. People like her. Mom, I want you to know that I told her I wouldn't support that. I told her you seemed perfectly competent to me, and that what you're doing with the foundation is amazing. And her response? She said I was being manipulated too. She said you're playing some kind of long game to make us feel guilty so we won't question your decisions. The picture Madison was painting was clear. I was either mentally incompetent and needed protection, or I was manipulative and needed to be controlled. Either way, she wanted access to my money and was willing to destroy my reputation and relationships to get it. Ryan, I need you to understand something. Your wife is not concerned about my well-being or our family's financial security. She's concerned about her own access to wealth she feels entitled to, and she's willing to have me declared mentally incompetent to get it. That's a serious accusation, Mom. It's a serious situation. She's already called my attorney's office claiming I'm not mentally competent. She's researching conservatorship laws. She's trying to convince you that I'm either crazy or manipulative. What would you call that? Ryan's face was pale. I don't know what to think anymore. Then let me make it easy for you. Tomorrow morning, I'm having a comprehensive mental competency evaluation done by one of the city's leading geriatric psychiatrists. I'm also having my attorney document every phone call, every inquiry, every attempt Madison makes to interfere with my legal and financial affairs. And I'm putting everything in irrevocable trusts that will make it impossible for anyone to access my assets without my explicit consent. Mom, you don't have to do all that. Yes, I do. Because your wife has declared war on my autonomy, and I intend to win. Ryan left an hour later, looking more confused and conflicted than when he'd arrived. I felt sorry for him, caught between his loyalty to me and his loyalty to his wife, but I also knew that he needed to choose. The days of me managing everyone else's emotions and relationships were over. The mental competency evaluation the next day was both thorough and humiliating. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the psychiatrist Robert had recommended, put me through 3 hours of cognitive testing, psychological evaluation, and detailed questioning about my recent decisions and lifestyle changes. Mrs. Cooper, I have to ask about the dramatic nature of these changes in your life. Moving to a new apartment, establishing a foundation, significantly altering your appearance and social circle, these are major life changes that might concern family members. Dr. Warren, if a 62-year-old man suddenly left his wife, bought a sports car, and started dating women half his age, would you question his mental competency? Or would you call it a midlife awakening? She smiled slightly. Point taken. But I do need to understand your decision-making process regarding the financial commitments you've made. I explained my reasoning for establishing the foundation, my long-standing interest in arts education, and my desire to use my resources in ways that aligned with my values. I described the careful planning that had gone into the gala, the professional advisors I'd consulted, and the legal safeguards I'd put in place to protect my assets. And the apartment? The new wardrobe, the lifestyle changes. Doctor, for 40 years I lived my life according to other people's needs and expectations. I dressed to be acceptable, not beautiful. I lived in a house that accommodated everyone else's preferences. I spent my time doing things that made other people happy. Recently, I decided to try living according to my own preferences for a change. And how does that feel? Like waking up after a very long sleep. Dr. Warren's final report was unequivocal. I was mentally competent, emotionally stable, in making rational decisions based on clear personal values and adequate financial resources. She noted that while my lifestyle changes were significant, they represented, quote, a healthy assertion of personal autonomy and self-actualization, rather than any kind of cognitive decline or psychological instability. The report was delivered to my attorney's office the same day, along with copies sent to Robert Chen and my personal physician. I wanted there to be no question about my mental state if Madison decided to escalate her campaign. 3 days later, Elena called with news that made me smile for the first time all week. Darling, you're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with Architectural Digest. They want to do a feature story about your penthouse and your transformation into philanthropy. Apparently, word is spreading in social circles about the mysterious widow who appeared out of nowhere with millions to spend on charity. Mysterious widow? Oh yes, you're quite the topic of conversation among the Upper East Side set. Margaret Pemberton has been singing your praises to everyone who will listen, and Charles Whitmore told 3 different people at his club about your foundation. You're becoming something of a legend. The Architectural Digest feature was scheduled for the following week, with a photographer coming to capture both the apartment and several of my paintings. The magazine wanted to tell the story of my transformation, focusing on how I'd used my newfound freedom and resources to create both a beautiful living space and a meaningful philanthropic legacy. But before the photo shoot could happen, Madison made her next move. I was in my art studio working on a new series of paintings, vibrant abstracts that reflected my current state of mind, when my doorman called to announce that Madison was in the lobby with someone she claimed was my son's attorney. Send them up, I said, curious to see what Madison's next strategy would be. Madison arrived at my door with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Kellerman, an attorney specializing in elder law and estate planning. Madison was dressed in her most conservative outfit, her hair pulled back severely, playing the role of concerned family member to perfection. Maxie, thank you for seeing us, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. David has some questions about your recent financial decisions that we think you should address. I invited them into the living room, noting how David's eyes swept the space appraising LY, taking in the expensive furnishings and original artwork. Mrs. Cooper, I've been retained by your family to review some recent changes to your estate planning and financial management, David began. There are concerns that you may have been influenced by parties who don't have your best interests at heart. What parties would those be? Well, this event planning company that organized your recent gala, for instance. They stood to make a significant profit from your charitable donation. And the financial advisor who's been encouraging you to make major changes to your investment portfolio. I looked at Madison, who was sitting on the edge of her chair with an expression of practiced worry. Madison, did you hire this attorney? I'm just concerned about you, Maxie. These sudden changes, the large amounts of money you're giving away, it's not like you. People are taking advantage of your generosity. Which people, specifically? David pulled out a folder and opened it on the coffee table. Mrs. Cooper, I've done some research into the companies and individuals you've been working with recently. The event planner charges premium rates that seem excessive for the services provided. Your new financial advisor has been encouraging high-risk investments that aren't appropriate for someone in your position. And this penthouse apartment, the purchase price was significantly above market value. Each statement was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while being completely wrong. Elena's fees were standard for high-end event planning. Robert's investment strategies were conservative and appropriate. The penthouse had actually been priced below market value due to the seller's urgent timeline. Mr. Kellerman, who exactly retained your services? Mrs. Walsh Cooper contacted me on behalf of the family. She's concerned that you're being exploited. And what exactly are you suggesting? Madison leaned forward, her mask of concern slipping slightly to reveal something harder underneath. We think you should consider having a professional financial manager take over your accounts. Just temporarily, until you've had time to think things through more carefully. A professional financial manager like who? David knows several firms that specialize in managing large inheritances. They could make sure your money is being invested responsibly, instead of being given away to charities that might not even be legitimate. The audacity was stunning. Madison was sitting in my living room, in the penthouse I'd purchased with my own money, suggesting that I wasn't competent to manage my own affairs and should turn control over to people she'd selected. Mr. Kellerman, I assume you've seen the mental competency evaluation I had done by Dr. Elizabeth Warren. David looked uncomfortable. Well, yes, but... And you're aware that I have an established relationship with a highly regarded financial advisory firm, that all my legal documents are in order, and that the charitable foundation I established is fully legitimate and properly structured? Mrs. Cooper, the issue isn't your legal competency. It's whether you're making decisions that are in your own best interest. And who gets to decide what's in my best interest? You? Madison? Your family is concerned. My family is concerned about their inheritance. I stood up, my patience exhausted. Mr. Kellerman, I'm going to ask you to leave now. And Madison, I'm going to ask you to never again hire attorneys to question my mental competency or financial decisions. Madison's composure finally cracked completely. Maxie, you're making a huge mistake. That money isn't just yours, it's Ryan's inheritance. It's your grandchildren's future. You can't just give it all away because you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, Madison. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference. This is ridiculous. You're 62 years old, living like some kind of socialite, throwing money around like it doesn't matter. What happens when you run out? What happens when you're old and need care and there's nothing left? Then I guess I'll manage the same way millions of other people do. But I won't spend the rest of my life hoarding money just so you can inherit it after treating me like garbage. Madison stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. Fine. If that's how you want to be. But don't expect us to take care of you when this all falls apart. I wouldn't dream of it. After they left, I called my attorney immediately to report the visit and David Kellerman's suggestions. Harrison confirmed that Kellerman wasn't actually representing Ryan. Madison had hired him herself and was claiming to speak for the family without any legal authority to do so. Mrs. Cooper, I think it would be wise to formally document your wishes regarding any future attempts to question your competency or interfere with your financial decisions. We can draft a statement that makes it clear you're acting of your own free will and that any future challenges to your mental state are unwelcome and unwarranted. Do it! And Harrison? If Madison continues this campaign, I want to explore legal options for harassment. That evening, Ryan called sounding exhausted and defeated. Mom, Madison told me what happened today. She says you threw her out of your apartment. I asked her to leave after she brought an attorney to my home to suggest I'm not competent to manage my own money. She says she's just trying to protect you. Ryan, your wife has called my attorney's office claiming I'm mentally incompetent. She's hired lawyers to question my financial decisions. She's suggested I need a conservator to manage my affairs. Does that sound like protection to you, or does it sound like someone trying to gain control over my assets? Ryan was quiet for a long time. I don't know what to think anymore. She's so convinced that you're being taken advantage of. By whom? The museum director who wants to partner with my foundation? The event planner who organized a successful fundraiser? The financial advisor who's protected and grown my assets for 3 years? She thinks they're all just after your money. And what does she think she's after? Another long silence. Then quietly, Mom, are you really going to give it all away? The whole inheritance? Ryan, I'm going to use my money in ways that bring me joy and make a difference in the world. Some of that will be charitable donations. Some will be investments in art and culture. Some will be spent on living my life the way I want to live it. And yes, some will be preserved for family members who treat me with respect and love, rather than seeing me as an obstacle to their financial security. What does that mean? It means that my will currently leaves everything to you, but I'm having it revised to reflect my new priorities. Children who support their mother's choices and autonomy will be provided for. Children who try to have their mother declared incompetent so they can control her money will not. Mom, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Elena called, barely able to contain her excitement. Maxine, darling, you need to sit down. I just got off the phone with someone from the MacArthur Foundation. They want to nominate you for a fellowship. A MacArthur Fellowship? The Genius Grants? The very same. Apparently your work with the foundation has caught their attention, and they're interested in supporting your vision for arts education philanthropy. A MacArthur Fellowship would provide $800,000 over 5 years, with no strings attached, to support my work. More importantly, it would be recognition from one of the most prestigious organizations in the country that what I was doing mattered, that my transformation from overlooked housewife to influential philanthropist was worth celebrating. The irony was exquisite. Madison had spent weeks trying to convince people that I was mentally incompetent and making poor decisions. Meanwhile, some of the most respected minds in the country were considering recognizing my work with one of the highest honors available to American innovators. I was still processing the news when my doorman called to announce another visitor, Ryan, alone this time. He looked terrible when I opened the door, unshaven, rumpled, like he hadn't slept in days. But there was something different in his posture, something resolved. Mom, I owe you an apology, a big one. I led him to the kitchen and poured coffee without saying anything, waiting for him to find his words. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, about how I never asked what you wanted, or what you needed, and I realized you were right. I've been so focused on seeing you as my mother, that I forgot you were also just a person. A person with your own dreams and desires and right to live your own life. Ryan. No, let me finish. Madison and I had a big fight last night. She wants me to support her in trying to get some kind of legal control over your finances. She's convinced that you're being manipulated and that we need to save you from yourself. And what did you tell her? I told her that you're the smartest, most capable person I know, and that if you want to give away every penny Dad left you, that's your right. I told her that I've watched you make good decisions my entire life, and I don't see any reason to start doubting you now. How did she take that? Not well. She said if I didn't support her in this, she'd know where my loyalties really lay. She said I had to choose between supporting my mother's delusions or supporting my wife's attempts to protect our family's future. And? I chose my mother. Ryan's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Madison moved out this morning. She's staying with her sister while she thinks about whether she can remain married to someone who doesn't prioritize their financial security. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I never wanted my choices to affect your marriage. Mom, Madison showed me who she really is these past few weeks. Someone who sees you as a source of money, rather than as a person worthy of respect. Someone who's willing to try to have you declared mentally incompetent to get access to your assets. Someone who thinks financial security is more important than family loyalty. Those are difficult things to learn about someone you love, yeah, but better to learn them now than after 20 years of marriage. He squeezed my hand. I want you to know that I support everything you're doing. The foundation, the gala, this apartment, all of it. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. It's time you took care of yourself. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was having a real conversation with my son. Not Ryan the husband who needed to balance his mother's needs with his wife's demands, but Ryan the individual who could appreciate what I was building and why it mattered. There's something else, he said as he was getting ready to leave. I want to volunteer for the foundation. I know I don't have experience with nonprofit work, but I'm good with numbers and organization. Maybe I could help with grant administration or scholarship coordination. Are you sure? It wouldn't pay much, and it might be awkward given everything that's happened with Madison. Mom, I've been working in corporate finance for 10 years, helping rich people get richer. Maybe it's time I tried helping deserving kids get educated instead. After Ryan left, I stood in my art studio looking out at Central Park, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 weeks ago, I had been a lonely widow cooking elaborate meals for people who barely tolerated me. Today, I was being considered for a MacArthur Fellowship, running a foundation that was already making a difference in young people's lives, and building a relationship with my son based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Madison had called me pathetic, but she'd been wrong about everything that mattered. She'd thought I was weak when I was actually strong, thought I was poor when I was actually wealthy, thought I was desperate for connection when I was actually desperate for authenticity. The real tragedy wasn't that she'd misjudged me. It was that she'd lost the opportunity to know the person I was becoming. She could have been part of this transformation, could have celebrated my emergence into my own life, could have built a genuine relationship with a woman who had more to offer than just domestic service. Instead, she'd revealed herself to be exactly the kind of person I no longer had room for in my life. Someone who valued money over relationships, control over respect, inheritance over integrity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. Darling, the Times wants to do a feature story about your foundation and the MacArthur nomination. Are you ready to be famous? I looked around my beautiful apartment, thought about the paintings I was creating, the scholarships we were funding, the programs we were supporting. I thought about the lunch meetings with museum directors, the dinner parties with artists and philanthropists, the rich, full life I was building on my own terms. I'm ready for anything, I texted back. And for the first time in my life, I truly was. 6 months later, I stood on the same stage where I'd announced the foundation, this time accepting a humanitarian award from the mayor of New York for the impact our programs were having on arts education in the city's schools. In the audience, I could see Ryan beaming with pride, along with dozens of friends I'd made in the philanthropic community. Madison wasn't there, of course. Her divorce from Ryan had been finalized 2 months earlier, with a settlement that reflected the short duration of their marriage and the separate nature of my financial assets. She'd tried one last time to claim that the money Ryan might eventually inherit should be considered in the settlement, but my attorney had easily demonstrated that my assets were my own and that any inheritance was speculative at best. The last I'd heard, Madison had moved to Los Angeles and was working for a celebrity real estate company, probably looking for her next opportunity to marry into wealth. I wished her well, in a distant sort of way. She'd given me the wake-up call I needed, even if it hadn't been intentional. As I looked out at the audience, filled with artists, educators, foundation recipients, and people who valued creativity and human potential, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. She would never have imagined that being called pathetic could be the beginning of the most authentic, joyful, meaningful period of her life. But then again, she'd never understood that sometimes the cruelest truths can set you free, if you're brave enough to listen to what they're really telling you about who you've become and who you could be instead. I'd spent 40 years being someone's wife, someone's mother-in-law. Now I was simply Maxine Cooper, and that was more than enough. 2 years after the MacArthur Fellowship announcement, I found myself standing in the main gallery of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, surrounded by some of the most influential people in New York's cultural landscape. The occasion was the opening of Emerging Voices, a Decade of the Cooper Foundation, an exhibition showcasing artwork created by scholarship recipients and students from programs we'd funded over the past 2 years. The transformation had been even more dramatic than I could have imagined. What started as a single foundation had grown into a network of partnerships with museums, schools, and community organizations across the country. The initial $5 million endowment had grown to nearly $12 million through careful investment and additional donations from supporters who believed in our mission. Elena stood beside me in a stunning emerald dress, holding a glass of champagne and surveying the crowd with satisfaction. "Darling, look what you've built." Do you ever think about that woman standing in her kitchen 2 years ago, wondering if anyone would ever see her as more than a convenience? "I try not to," I replied, smoothing down the deep purple silk dress I'd chosen for the evening. "She feels like someone I used to know in another life." The exhibition was breathtaking. Paintings, sculptures, photographs, and mixed media pieces created by young artists whose educations had been funded by Cooper Foundation scholarships lined the walls of 3 separate galleries. Each piece was accompanied by a small placard that told the artist's story, where they'd come from, what obstacles they'd overcome, how the scholarship had changed their trajectory. Maria Santos, whose abstract paintings incorporated elements from her grandmother's traditional Mexican textiles, had gone from working double shifts at a restaurant to attending Parsons School of Design. David Kim, whose photography series documented the gentrification of his neighborhood in Queens, had been the first person in his family to attend college. Jasmine Williams, whose sculptural installations explored themes of identity and belonging, had grown up in foster care and was now pursuing her MFA at Yale. "Mrs. Cooper?" A young woman approached me tentatively, and I recognized her immediately from the artist biographies I'd studied in preparation for tonight. "Amara! I'm so thrilled to finally meet you in person." Amara Johnson was one of our first scholarship recipients, a painter whose work exploring the intersection of mental health and creativity had been featured in several prominent galleries. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Before the scholarship, I was working 3 part-time jobs and taking classes at community college when I could afford them. I honestly didn't think art school was possible for someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Someone whose parents cleaned office buildings to pay rent. Someone who grew up thinking that art was something other people got to do." She gestured toward her painting hanging on the nearby wall, a vibrant piece that seemed to pulse with life and energy. "But you didn't just give me money for tuition. You gave me permission to believe I deserve to be here." Conversations like this had become commonplace in my life, but they never stopped moving me. Each scholarship recipient carried with them not just their own dreams, but the dreams of families and communities that had been told creative careers were luxuries they couldn't afford. Ryan appeared at my elbow, handsome in his navy suit and looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Working for the foundation had transformed him almost as much as it had transformed me. He'd discovered a passion for nonprofit administration that his corporate finance job had never provided, and he'd thrown himself into the work with an enthusiasm that reminded me of the curious, idealistic young man he'd been before the pressures of adult life had worn him down. "Mom, The museum director wants to speak with you about expanding the exhibition program. Apparently, they're getting requests from other institutions to host traveling versions of the show. That's wonderful. Did you know that the Whitney has expressed interest in creating a permanent collection of work by Cooper Foundation scholars? I did not know that. That's incredible. As we talked, I noticed a familiar figure near the entrance to the gallery. Madison stood just inside the doorway, dressed in a black cocktail dress that was elegant but understated. She looked older, somehow. Not just the 2 years that had passed, but older in a way that suggested disappointment had aged her more rapidly than time alone. She was scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone. When her eyes met mine across the room, she stood straighter and began making her way toward me. "Mom," Ryan said quietly, having followed my gaze. "Do you want me to—" "No, it's fine. I'm curious to hear what she has to say." Madison approached with the careful confidence I remembered, though something in her posture suggested it was more performance than genuine assurance. She looked around the gallery, taking in the artwork, the elegantly dressed crowd, the obvious success of the evening. "Hello, Maxine. The exhibition is beautiful. Congratulations." "Thank you, Madison. I'm surprised to see you here. I was in town for work, and I saw the announcement in the Times. I wanted to see what you'd built." She paused, glancing around again. "It's quite impressive." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, two women who had once been family but were now essentially strangers. Ryan hovered nearby, protective, but trying not to be obvious about it. "How are things in Los Angeles?" I asked, more out of politeness than genuine curiosity. "Good. Busy. The real estate market there is different from New York. More volatile, but also more opportunities, if you know how to read the trends." Madison's voice had the practiced cheerfulness of someone who'd learned to present success, even when she wasn't entirely sure she was achieving it. "I'm glad it's working out for you." "Maxine, I wondered if we could talk privately for a few minutes. There are some things I'd like to say." I glanced at Ryan, who looked skeptical but nodded slightly. "Of course. Ryan, could you excuse us for a moment?" Madison and I found a quiet corner of the gallery, near a stunning photograph by one of our scholarship recipients, that captured children painting a mural on the wall of their school. "I owe you an apology," Madison began, her voice lower and more serious than the social pleasantries we'd exchanged. "For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For trying to interfere with your financial decisions. Thank you, that means something. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I realize I was scared. Ryan and I were struggling financially more than we wanted to admit, and when I learned about your inheritance, I saw it as a solution to our problems rather than as your money to do with as you chose." It was more honest than I'd expected from her, and I found myself genuinely listening rather than just waiting for her to finish. "I convinced myself that you were being taken advantage of because I couldn't accept that you were capable of making sophisticated financial decisions on your own. I'd spent so long seeing you as just Ryan's mother that I couldn't recognize you as an independent person with your own intelligence and agency. Madison, I appreciate your honesty. But I have to ask, what's brought this on? It's been 2 years." She looked uncomfortable, and for the first time since she'd approached me, her composure slipped slightly. "I've been seeing a therapist, working through some issues about money and control and relationships. And she's helped me understand that the way I treated you said more about my own insecurities than it did about your capabilities. That takes courage, to look at yourself that honestly. I also wanted you to know that I've been following the Foundation's work in the media. What you've accomplished is extraordinary. Those kids," she gestured toward the artwork surrounding us, "their lives are different because of what you've built. I was wrong about everything." We stood there quietly for a moment, watching people move through the gallery, admiring the artwork, and discussing the Foundation's impact with the passionate intensity that art lovers brought to these kinds of events. "Madison, can I ask you something?" "Of course. That night when you called me pathetic, did you really believe that, or were you just trying to hurt me?" She winced, and I could see that the memory was painful for her too. "Honestly, I think I believed it in that moment. I was so focused on my own frustration with what I saw as your intrusion into our lives that I couldn't see how cruel I was being. I couldn't see that what I was calling pathetic was actually just love expressed in the only way you knew how. And now? Now I see a woman who took a devastating insult and used it as fuel to transform her entire life. Who turned personal pain into something that's helping hundreds of other people pursue their dreams. There's nothing pathetic about that. It's actually kind of magnificent. The conversation was interrupted by Elena, who appeared with a man I didn't recognize in tow. Maxine, darling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to introduce you to Jonathan Mills from the Ford Foundation. He has a proposal that I think you'll find very interesting. Jonathan turned out to be leading an initiative to fund arts education programs in rural communities, areas that had been particularly hard hit by cuts to creative programming in schools. He was looking for partners with experience in urban education who might be interested in expanding their reach. Mrs. Cooper, your foundation's model of combining direct financial support for students with institutional partnerships for programming is exactly what we've been hoping to replicate in smaller communities. Would you be interested in discussing a collaboration? We talked for nearly 20 minutes about the challenges and opportunities of rural arts education, the different approaches that might work in communities with fewer resources, and the potential for creating scholarship programs specifically designed for students who wanted to pursue creative careers but had limited access to training and education. When Jonathan excused himself to circulate among the other guests, I turned back to find Madison still standing nearby, though she'd been joined by Ryan. I should let you get back to your event, Madison said. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Madison, wait, can I ask you something else? Sure. Are you happy? In Los Angeles? With your work? With your life in general? She considered the question seriously. I'm getting there. I'm learning things about myself that I didn't know before. About what I actually want versus what I thought I was supposed to want. It's been harder than I expected, but also more honest. That sounds familiar. Does it get easier? The process of figuring out who you actually are underneath all the roles you've been playing? I thought about the question, looking around the gallery at the evidence of what I'd built from the ashes of my old life. It gets more authentic, which doesn't necessarily mean easier, but it means more worthwhile. Madison nodded, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely thoughtful rather than calculating. I'm glad I came tonight. Seeing this, seeing what you've accomplished, it helps me understand what's possible when you stop trying to control other people and start focusing on controlling your own choices. After she left, Ryan and I stood together, watching the crowd of people engaging with the artwork that represented so much more than paintings and photographs. Each piece was evidence of a life that had been changed, a dream that had been made possible, a future that looked different because someone had believed it was worth investing in. How do you feel about seeing her again? Ryan asked. Surprisingly okay. She seems different, more self-aware. Do you think she was sincere? I think she was trying to be. Whether she follows through on that self-awareness is up to her. And if she doesn't, then it doesn't affect me. The woman who would have worried about Madison's personal growth and tried to fix her problems died the night she called me pathetic. The woman who replaced her is too busy living her own life to manage anyone else's. The evening continued with more conversations, more introductions, more discussions about future collaborations and expansion opportunities. Dr. Sarah Kim from the Children's Hospital Program approached me about developing art therapy scholarships. A representative from the Kennedy Center wanted to discuss funding for a youth theater initiative. By the time the reception wound down, I had enough new project ideas to keep the foundation busy for the next 5 years. As Elena and I rode home in the car service I'd hired for the evening, she leaned back against the leather seats with a satisfied sigh. Another triumph, darling. Did you see the article that Times critic was working on during the reception? She seemed genuinely moved by the stories behind the artwork. It's amazing how different this feels from that first gala 2 years ago. Then I felt like I was proving something. Tonight felt like I was just sharing something. That's growth, my dear. The difference between needing external validation and simply enjoying the work itself. The next morning, I woke up in my penthouse to find several messages on my phone. The first was from Margaret Pemberton at the Whitney, confirming their interest in creating a permanent collection of Cooper Foundation scholar work. The second was from Jonathan Mills at the Ford Foundation, with details about the rural arts education collaboration he'd proposed. The third message was from Ryan. Mom, I'm proud of who you've become. Not just the foundation and the recognition, but the person. You seem genuinely happy in a way I don't remember from before. Love you. I carried my coffee to the art studio and began work on a new painting, something I'd been planning for weeks. It was a self-portrait, but not a traditional one. Instead of trying to capture my physical appearance, I was painting the feeling of transformation. Swirls of color that moved from muted grays and browns at the bottom of the canvas to vibrant blues and golds at the top, representing the journey from who I'd been to who I'd become. As I mixed paints on my palette, I thought about Madison's question from the night before. Did it get easier, the process of figuring out who you actually were? The honest answer was that it got more complex. The further I moved away from the woman who had measured her worth by how much other people needed her, the more I discovered about what I was actually capable of. Each success brought new opportunities, which brought new challenges, which required new growth. But complexity wasn't the same as difficulty. The challenges I faced now, managing a growing foundation, navigating the art world's politics, balancing multiple partnerships and initiatives, were problems I'd chosen. They were the natural consequences of pursuing goals that mattered to me, rather than trying to meet other people's expectations. The phone rang as I was adding detail to a particularly intricate section of the painting. The caller ID showed Robert Chen's office. Maxine, I have some interesting news. Do you remember that pharmaceutical company stock you asked me to research last month? The biotech firm that's developing new treatments for Alzheimer's. Of course. You said it was speculative but promising. Well, they just announced breakthrough results in their Phase 3 trials. The stock has tripled in value overnight. Your investment is now worth about $4 million. I set down my brush, processing the information. $4 million from a stock investment I'd made almost casually, based on research into companies that were working on treatments for diseases that affected elderly populations. It was money I'd invested because I believed in the science, not because I'd expected dramatic returns. Robert, I want to donate it. The entire amount? The entire amount. Can you set up a new grant program specifically for medical research scholarships? I want to fund students who are interested in pursuing careers in geriatric medicine and Alzheimer's research. Maxine, are you sure? That's a substantial windfall. I'm positive. The Foundation's mission is expanding anyway. If we're going to help young people pursue careers that make a difference, medical research should certainly be included. After I hung up, I realized that the conversation would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. The old Maxine would have agonized over giving away $4 million, would have consulted with family members, would have worried about whether she was being responsible or foolish. The new Maxine had made the decision in less than 30 seconds, based on her values and her vision for the Foundation's impact. It felt natural, even inevitable. That afternoon, I had lunch with Amara Johnson, the scholarship recipient I'd met at the exhibition opening. She'd asked if we could meet to discuss an idea she'd been developing, and I was curious to hear what she had in mind. We met at a small cafe near her studio in Bushwick, a neighborhood that had become home to dozens of young artists who couldn't afford Manhattan rents but wanted to be part of New York's creative community. Mrs. Cooper, I've been thinking about my experience as a Cooper Foundation scholar, and I realized that the financial support was only part of what made the difference for me. Amara began, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. The mentorship, the connections to other artists, the sense of being part of a community that was just as valuable as the tuition money. That's wonderful to hear. What are you thinking? I want to create a mentorship program that pairs current scholars with recent graduates who are establishing their careers. Kind of like a big sister program, but for artists navigating the transition from school to professional practice. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Young artists needed more than just financial support to succeed. They needed guidance, connections, and the kind of practical knowledge that could only come from people who had recently navigated the same challenges. Amara, that's exactly the kind of thinking that could transform how we support emerging artists. Have you developed any specifics about how the program would work? We spent 2 hours developing the framework for what would become the Cooper Foundation Mentorship Initiative. Amara had thought through everything from pairing criteria to program structure to measurement of outcomes. By the end of our conversation, I was convinced that she should be the one to lead the program's development. "I'd like to offer you a position with the foundation," I said as we finished our coffee. "Program Director for the Mentorship Initiative. You'd be responsible for developing and implementing the program we've discussed." Amara's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. You understand the needs of emerging artists because you are one. You've experienced our programs from the recipient side, so you know what works and what doesn't. And you clearly have the vision and organizational skills to build something meaningful." "Mrs. Cooper, I don't know what to say. Yes. Absolutely yes." Driving home from Brooklyn, I reflected on how natural it had felt to offer Amara the position. 2 years ago, I would have agonized over such a decision, would have consulted with Ryan and Madison and probably a few other people before making any significant choices about the foundation's direction. Now, I trusted my instincts. I'd learned to recognize good ideas and capable people, and I'd developed the confidence to act on those recognitions quickly and decisively. That evening, I attended a small dinner party hosted by Charles and Vivian Whitmore at their Park Avenue apartment. The guest list was intimate but impressive. Museum directors, gallery owners, established artists, and other philanthropists who shared an interest in supporting creative endeavors. The conversation ranged from the impact of digital technology on traditional art forms to the role of private foundations in supporting work that government funding couldn't or wouldn't cover. I found myself contributing actively to discussions that would have intimidated me 2 years ago, sharing insights from the foundation's work and proposing collaborations that could benefit everyone involved. "Maxine, I have to say, your foundation's approach to supporting emerging artists has been remarkable," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art. "We've seen such a difference in the quality and ambition of work coming from students in programs you've supported." "Thank you, Jennifer. I think it's because we're funding people, rather than just projects. When you invest in an artist's education and development over time, rather than just supporting a single exhibition or residency, you get much more sustainable results. Have you considered expanding internationally? I know several institutions in London and Paris that would be interested in similar partnerships." The suggestion opened up an entirely new realm of possibilities. International expansion would require significant additional resources and much more complex program administration, but it would also allow the foundation to support artistic exchange and cross-cultural collaboration in ways that could be transformative for participants. "That's an intriguing idea. I'd love to explore it further." As the evening wound down, I realized that I was no longer surprised by my comfort in these settings. Conversations with influential, accomplished people felt natural now, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I had something meaningful to contribute. The drive home took me past the building where Ryan and Madison had lived during their marriage. I glanced up at the windows of their former apartment, thinking about the woman I'd been when I used to visit them there. She'd been so eager to please, so desperate for approval, so willing to diminish herself to fit into their lives. That woman seemed like a character from a story I'd read long ago, someone I could remember but no longer related to in any personal way. My phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Darling, just saw the announcement about your medical research grant program in tomorrow's Times. You're becoming quite the serial philanthropist. What's next, saving the whales?" I laughed, typing back, "Don't give me ideas, though ocean conservation could be interesting." As I settled into bed that night, I thought about Madison's question again. Did it get easier, figuring out who you actually were underneath all the roles you'd been playing? The answer, I realized, was that it became irrelevant. Once you stopped trying to be who other people wanted you to be and started focusing on who you wanted to become, the question changed entirely. I wasn't trying to figure out who I really was anymore. I was actively creating who I wanted to be, day by day, choice by choice, project by project. The woman who had been called pathetic 2 years ago had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who had learned that the most powerful response to an insult was to prove it wrong. By living a life so authentic and meaningful, that the original criticism became laughable. Madison's cruel words had been intended to diminish me, but they'd actually been the catalyst for the most expansive period of my life. Sometimes the worst things someone could say to you turned out to be exactly what you needed to hear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.